Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first chapter of Materials Management is the Introduction to Materials Management. All right, guys, now we're going to get into wealth. So what is wealth? Let's just go ahead and start with that, and then we'll move into these other portions. Basically, wealth is just measured by the amount of goods and services that's produced. That's really the best way to define it. And wealth in a country, for instance, is measured by gross national product. And then there is also goods and services, and those are, let me just give you definitions of each one of those. The good is basically something you can physically touch. And then you also have services. And those are anything that's been performed or is a performance of a useful function. Okay. Now we're looking at national resources too. That's part of wealth. And there's different parts of a natural resource, and there's transformation and conversion. So transformation, that's needed to transform your natural resources into useful goods. And then you have your conversion, which is when you take raw materials and they are converted into something a lot more valuable than what they started out as. And when you're looking at managing processes, that's the whole shebang. That's managing all of these processes, from planning and control, all the way through. Let's look at the operating environment. That plays a major part of everything when it comes to how things are handled. So, like, look at the government. Think about all the regulations. We see this all the time in the news. The regulations that our government puts on things, a lot of times they have a stronghold on stuff. And I'll be honest with you, sometimes I feel like they have a stronghold on things that they don't need to have a stronghold on. And then there's things I feel like they need to have a little bit more of a stronghold on. So it's just that war against Big Brother, so to speak, and everybody has their own viewpoint on that. And then also the environment, the safety, the product liability, and taxation. Again, that all comes in hand when you're dealing with the government. Okay, when you're looking at the economy, man, if we're in a recession, there are things that used to be very valuable that may not be as valuable, and then sometimes there's things that are even more valuable. I'll go ahead and tell you this right now. During one of our recessions that we had, our gas was over $4 a gallon, so and we were out at a lot of gas stations. We ran out, so gas at that time was very valuable. But then there were other things that weren't valuable, and a lot of the homes were not as valuable. So that kind of gives you an idea of how big of a play that the economy influences on your demand. And it also has shortages and surpluses. So we saw that during that time too. I'll go ahead and tell you there was a shortage of jobs. I'll go ahead and tell you that right now. That was a time that I will never forget. And so we have a big the economy plays a big factor in our operating environment. So, as far as competition, it is now global. We have globalization to thank for that. And there is more efficient transportation, right? So, you look back in the 1940s, 1950s, our transportation wasn't the same. Now we have way more efficient transportation, so that definitely changes the game. And again, same thing, increased speed of communications, right? So everything has changed. We're not having to make a phone call. We can wire money in seconds. We can do all sorts of things that maybe we just couldn't do back in the day. So that changes our operating environment as well. Moving on, we're looking at customers. They play a huge role. And what do they want? They're kind of demanding sometimes. So they want fair prices, which, hey, that's reasonable, but they also want improved quality. So you're not going to get customers wanting to buy something that is not good quality, right? And then they also want faster and accurate lead time. So I don't want to wait forever to get my product. I want it now. We want it now. I mean, think about when we order stuff from Amazon. We want it in 2 days. Heck, if we could get it sooner, we would, right? And then we want improved pre-sale and after-sale service if there's a problem with it. If we have a question, we want somebody to tell us how to use this product. Think about a new cell phone. You want somebody to be able to tell you how to use it. And then there's product and volume flexibility that we also need to have. I hate it when they run out of products, right? We need to make sure that they have that inventory for their customers. So we need that flexibility in there. Quality, we always want to make sure it exceeds customer expectations. That's definitely part of our operating environment as well. And it's not a bad idea a lot of times when you're producing a product to kind of, I go by under promise over deliver. So when it comes to quality, Apple, for instance, they have great quality products and they have a great reputation and they always exceed customer expectations. We have order qualifiers and winners. And so when we're looking at order qualifiers, these are basically customer requirements for price, quality, delivery, etc. And that's when the customer is given their stamp of approval on certain things that they want in their product. And a company must meet or exceed those minimum requirements to qualify for the order. So, you're not going to really get any a good quality product if you don't have this. It's not going to pass the test, so to speak. So these are order qualifiers that you must have if you want to keep a good market or you want to stay in the market, I guess you could say, and be competitive with your competitors for a certain product. And then there's also order winners. And these are the characteristics that persuade customers to select a product or service from a qualifying company. So you can have a product that has all of those order qualifiers, but what sets you apart? What persuades those customers to select that product or service from that company? And if we want to use Apple, for instance, one of the biggest sales points that they have with their products is they keep it simple. Like the iPhone, how many times do you actually see them really change the iPhone up to the point that people don't really know how to operate it? And when they first came out with the iPhone, they said no. Steve was like, no, I want something easy. I want something that they don't even need an owner's manual to operate. And we're still there. I mean, we really don't need an owner's manual to know how to operate an iPhone. It is very, very simple. It is very reliable. And that till this day is the reason a lot of people still continue to purchase an iPhone and a lot of the Apple products. All right, y'all. So now we're looking at a good display of manufacturing strategy. It's just a nice little chart that we can look at. And on manufacturing strategy, we have different strategies, I guess you can say, that you can use to manufacture items. And the first one we're going to look at is engineer to order. And it's going to be basically a unique engineering design, engineer to order for the customer. Now, look at the lead time on this. This is a very large lead time. It's the longest lead time that you're going to have on any of these strategies. And what a lead time is it's a time from the receipt of an order to the delivery of a product. So you can see right there, it starts with the design, it goes all the way over through the shipping, okay? Now, if we look at the make to order, a make to order, it does not make the product until the customer order has been received. Now, something that pops in my head every time I think about this is a restaurant. When you go to a restaurant and you place your order and then they make it for you and they bring it back out, there you go. There's your make to order. Okay, they've already got the inventory of the products to make your order. It's not like they're going to have to go out and kill the cow and all that other stuff. They've cut the meat back there if you're getting a hamburger or whatever. But they've got to manufacture it, assemble it, and then ship it or take it out to you. So there's a good example of making to order, and you can see the delivery lead time on that. All right, configure to order. That's when customers are allowed to configure a product based on various options. Same lead time on this, okay? So they just have more options, a little more input on this. So this is more specific, I guess you can say. And then assemble to order. There's a shorter lead time on this, all right? This is when a product is made from standard components that a manufacturer can inventory and assemble according to what the customer wants. Have y'all heard of this before? Remember, like, have you ever, I don't know if any of y'all have ever gone to a car dealership and, they actually do a special order for you for a car. They don't have to just make those components from scratch. They have them, the manufacturer has them, but they're just going to change them up a little bit to assemble to order that car for you. So this delivery lead time is a lot shorter than the other delivery lead times that we have mentioned already. But the shortest delivery lead time is the make to stock, okay? And basically, it is the supplier manufactures the goods and sells the finished goods inventory, make to stock. So if you're looking at your stores when you go and you get it, there's a good example of make to stock. It's already ready for you. It's sitting there on the shelf. So we're going to go a little bit further into all of this. We have engineer to order, and that's basically custom designs, like we mentioned, unique products. There's a long lead time on that, and the inventory is purchased after the product is designed. We're also going to have make to order here. So again, the manufacturer does not start until the order is received. Remember the restaurant analogy. I mean, you walk up to the counter, you place your order, then they start making, your food and putting your order together. And this often uses standard components. They already have these ingredients. It takes a little design time, the lead time is reduced, and the inventory is held as raw materials. Configure to order. Customers are allowed to configure the product based on features and options. There may be an entirely new configuration and no design time required, so shorter delivery lead time. We have assembled to order. Inventory is held as standard components. No design time required, only assembly required and a shorter lead time. Remember, I kind of told you about the car. You're not totally redesigning a car. The car design itself is not going to change. You just may want certain components different on your car than the base model. So there you go. You have assembled to order. A good example of that right there. Yeah, make to stock. That's the manufacturer produces the goods in anticipation of customer demand. Little or no customer involvement with design. Shortest lead time, and the inventory is held as finished goods. And here's something we have not talked about yet, and this is postponement. And basically, guys, what this does is it deliberately delays the final assembly to eliminate the excess of finished goods, because your book actually used a good example of a printer. And let's say, there's this printer, but it needs to go out, there's different countries ordering this printer. So, the components to connect the printer are going to be different in different countries depending on how those countries are set up. So they're not going to make a printer with the components that only work for the US. They've got to wait and see where the order's coming from. So this is a good example of a product that they can use as postponement. So again, it delays completion until the latest possible time. It shifts differentiation and product as close to customer as possible, and it eliminates excess finished goods. And here's a nice little chart that talks about the supply chain concept. It starts with your supplier, and then it moves to your manufacturer, your distribution system, and then ends with your endpoint, which is your customer. So the supplier is what we have as physical supply, and then of course manufacturer, that's manufacturing, planning, and control. That all is in that you know I guess portion right there, and then your distribution system, which is the physical distribution, and the ultimate endpoint, which is the customer. This shows you the dominant flow of products and services. Always remember that sometimes that can go the opposite way. So let's say you're special ordering something, that's probably going to go a little bit different, right? So anyway, here is a good example of that. All right, y'all, now we're looking at the supply chain concept. So this includes all activities and processes to supply a product or service to the customer, and it links many companies. Remember, it's not just one company from point A to point D or E or whatever. These are many companies that are linked together to go through the whole supply chain. So you start with your supplier and you end with your retailer or your distributor. So there's many companies involved in this process, and it has several supplier and customer relationships, and they may contain intermediaries. So you have wholesalers, warehouses, and retailers. And so also you got to think about the flow of the products through this, the services through this, the information through this, and the cash. Again, this all is contained within the supply chain concept. When we're looking at performance metrics, these are very, very, very important, okay? And why are these important? Well, they communicate expectations, and they identify problems, and they direct a course of action, and they also motivate your people. So we have to have performance metrics within a company. We can't just go blindly in and start saying we're just going to do all this stuff and not know how we're going to figure out where we get from point A and B, and how we know how good we're doing. So we have to find some way to measure this and figure out how we're doing. And so a metric, it equals a verifiable measure. And so the benefits of this include the following. It's reporting of data for better control, communicating priorities by the organization, drawing attention to opportunities for improvement, and keeping processes under control. Now, some of the challenges that we see are that customers are increasingly demanding. We mentioned that earlier. We want it now and we want it a certain way, and we're spoiled. We do, but this is the world that we live in right now. And supply chains are very large. Product life cycles are getting shorter. So, you may have a certain product and then people are done with it. They're tired of it. It's not that it falls apart. We just want something else. We want something better, right? Vast amounts of data, and there's an increasing number of alternatives. So let's actually look at your metrics. What type of metrics are we looking at? Okay. The first one is performance measures, and these are basically quantified and objective measures, and they have to contain two parameters for it to be a good performance measure. And then we also have performance standards, and they set the goals. This is the standard that the company wants. It sets the goals and it establishes the values. So the performance standards, like I said, they set the goals, but the performance measures, they're the ones that actually go in there and reveal how close you were to that goal. So make sure y'all know the difference between performance standards and performance measures. So we're implementing a metrics program. How are we going to do that? How does a company do that? They don't just pull it out of thin air, guys. They got to first establish company goals and objectives. All right. So we got to figure out what we want to accomplish. Otherwise, we don't even know where to start. We just can't come out with if you're doing this right, you're not going to just come out with a metrics program and not know what our goal is. I mean, that doesn't even make sense. So we first have to establish company goals and objectives. And then we have to define what that performance is that we're measuring. Okay? After that, we're going to state the measurement. That's pretty easy. We're going to figure out how we're going to measure. We're going to state that measurement, and then we're going to set that performance standard. And we have to be realistic with this. Sometimes you have to tweak this as you go along, but you really, really need to be realistic with this. And then we're going to educate the participants. We've got to educate people and let them know, hey guys, this is what our standards are. This is what we're looking at. This is where communication comes in. And you need to apply this program consistently. Don't keep on changing these metrics. All right? That's like, think about it, guys. Think about if you've got a review and every year on your job performance review, they changed how they evaluated you. So you never really knew what the company was expecting out of you. That's a good example of this. So you can even use that as an example in your head if that helps you. But think about how you would want to, be measured on this, on your performance. And then you have, a review and adjust as necessary. So again, it's kind of a rinse and repeat process. But you have to do this to be successful. Now, there are some conflicts in the traditional systems. Your book goes into this. I'm not going to harp on this too much. We're not there anymore. Thank goodness we've evolved from a lot of them. But now, these are examples of company objectives, and these are what, they originally wanted to provide. And there's nothing really wrong with a lot of these, but we have changed a lot of this as we've evolved. So they always wanted the best customer service. They wanted the lowest production cost. They wanted the lowest inventory investment, and they wanted the lowest distribution costs, okay? So if you're actually looking at this, there's sometimes, places where, for instance, if you want the best customer service, you may have to increase one of these others. It's all going to affect each other. So just keep that in mind. So when we're looking at materials management, planning and controlling the flow of materials, that's huge, right? So we got to know, that's part of management. We got to know how we are going to control the flow of our materials to make sure that we end up getting the product out to who we need to get it out to in the best way possible and minimize our costs. That's always the bottom line that the companies are looking at, right? But we also want to keep customer service in mind. So our objectives is to maximize the use of the firm's resources. Again, we're trying to keep the bottom line the best we can. We don't want to waste any product because that's going to waste money. And then we also want to provide the required level of customer service. We're looking at materials management and profits here. So we're looking at direct labor. And again, direct labor, that actually, it varies, and so does direct material. Both of those vary depending on your volumes that you're going to be selling, okay? So those go hand in hand. Just always remember that. Now, your overhead is a different bird. It's going to be a little different child out there. It's not going to vary with the volume sold. That is not going to change your overhead. Your overhead is usually always going to stay consistent throughout. All right. So just make sure you know that your direct labor and your direct material are going to vary depending on the volume that you're selling, and your overhead is going to be remaining consistent. Now here is a good example of how, and y'all, this is not hard. This is just basic arithmetic. Don't let this worry you when you see something like this. And I'll just go ahead and go through this with you really fast because it's not that bad. So over to the right, you're just saying how, like for instance, let's just say you made $1 million on revenue when that, off of a product or whatever. We're just using that's actually low, but let's just use that as an example. The percent of sales is over there to your right. So that's 100% of your sales. Now we got to take out the cost of goods sold, right? So it wasn't free to produce that product. There's direct material cost of 500,000. There's direct labor cost of 200,000. Remember that varies with your volume. And then you've got your factory overhead, which is 200,000. So if you look at the percent of sales, direct material 500,000, what percentage of $1 million is that? Well, that's 50%. The 200,000 is 20%, and the factory overhead is 20%. So your total cost of goods sold is 900,000. And again, that's 90%. So out of that million, the 900,000 is gone. So your profit, even though that million looked great, you ain't getting that back. That's out the door. Your profit on that is 100,000. That's only 10% of your revenue. So you're not happy about this, right? I mean, that's a lot of work for just $100,000. What about, how can we move this? How can we change this? So let's look in the future here, and let's see what else we can do to help increase our profit. So here's an option. We can reduce materials by 12% and labor by 5%, right? So again, we got a revenue at $1 million, 100% of sales. We got direct material. We reduced our material by 12%, so we've dropped it down to 440,000. So that's 44% of sales. And we have reduced our labor by 5%. So, you're looking at 200,000, and that's 20%. But again, our overhead is stationary. It's still at 200,000. That's 20%. Our total cost of goods sold is 840,000 this time. And so our gross profit just went up to 160,000. Not bad. So the profit has increased by 60%. All right. So at this point, we're looking at materials management again. We're wanting to get the same result. You don't necessarily always have to reduce your direct material and direct labor costs. What if you really pushed your sales through the roof and you said, guys, look, we need to increase our sales. Instead of bringing in $1 million, we need to bring in $1 million, or we need to bring more than that. So in this situation, it's just increased to 1,200,000. So we're using the same numbers, we're increasing it, and then we're still getting the same gross profit. Now imagine if you reduced the direct material and direct labor cost and increased your sales. Wouldn't that be great? You'd be making a much higher gross profit than 160,000 if we do this. Now we're looking at work in process. Here, this is a very, very big investment for a company. All right. So again, if you're looking at the bottom line, you need to keep this low. And a good way to do this is reducing the amount of time that the inventory spends in production. Okay. So again, labor, materials, and overhead, they're applied to goods throughout the production. But again, reducing the time that the inventory spends in production, that's going to be a good way to keep this number right here low, your work in process low. Manufacturing, planning, and control. That's planning and controlling the flow of materials through the manufacturing process. We've already gone over that. There's different portions of that. We're going to go here in just a second into further detail on each one. There's production planning, implementation and control, and inventory management. Looking at production planning, that meets the demands of the marketplace. They've got to establish priorities, ensure capacity is available. I got to make sure that I'm able to produce what I need to produce, right? I can't say I'm going to produce X amount of items and I don't even have the capacity to do that. That doesn't make any sense. So you've got to ensure that you have the capacity available, and you have certain activities that you need to follow through with. One is forecasting. That's huge. Major master planning, materials requirements planning, and capacity planning. I just mentioned that. So you have implementation and control, right? That's putting into action and executing the plans made by production planning. We got all these plans that we just did. Now let's put them into action. Let's execute those plans. Production activity control, that's shop floor control. That's down there in the nitty gritty. That's down there on the floor. This is where you have control of the actual production. And then you have purchasing. So looking at your inventory management, inventory is carried for sale or to provide material supplies to production. It provides a buffer against the differences in demand rates and production rates. And it also supports production or is a result of production. So guys, look at that second bullet. Before I go to the next slide, just look at that second bullet. It provides a buffer against the differences in demand rates and production rates. Because your demand rates and your production rates, what if you don't want to have a bunch of excess inventory. So just that's kind of where that falls into that area right there for inventory management. Inputs to the manufacturing planning and control system. You have product description. We need to know what the product is. What's the description of the product, okay? We need to know the process specifications. What time? How long is it going to take to produce this, right? And then the available facilities, and then the quantities that's required. That's going to dictate everything. And we're going to go into deeper detail on each one of these. So your product description is like your engineering drawings and your specifications, your bill of materials. So that describes the components and quantities used to make that product. And it also describes these subassemblies at various stages, okay? And then your product process specifications. That's recorded on a route sheet usually that they have. And anybody that's worked in a manufacturing plant, some of y'all have actually dealt with this. It describes how the product is made. So basically the operations are required to make the product. That's going to be in the process specifications, the sequence, and when those operations are going to have to take place, which one's first, which one's second, etc., and the equipment and necessaries required, and what is the standard time to perform each operation. That's huge. That is going to make a big impact on your production. And this is time needed to perform operations. So it's expressed in standard time, y'all, and it's an average operator working at a normal pace. This does not mean the overeager operator that can get this done in half the time of a regular operator. This is an average operator working at a normal pace. This is where this is, and it's needed for scheduling work, loading plant, delivery promises, and costing product. And it's obtained from the routing information. So we need that routing information first, and then we can get to this point right here. So as we're looking at another factor into the manufacturing planning and control system, we need to look at the available facilities. So what equipment is available within these facilities? What do we have? What kind of tools do we have to actually do the manufacturing that we need to do? And what labor is available in that manufacturing plant that we need? Do we have enough labor to actually manufacture the products? And this is all obtained from the work center information. And we're looking at the quantities required. So the information from the following areas helps us understand what quantities we're going to need. Forecasting is big, y'all. I'm forecasting in 25 that in fall of 2025 that I'm going to have, 15% more students in my 3100 class based on numbers from all the previous semesters. I mean, that's how we forecast. We use historical information to see what we think is going to happen in the future. And then we try to adjust for that so it's not some big surprise. That's what forecasting is. We have customer orders. That helps dictate, obviously, the quantities required. We're not going to just make it for nobody. We know based on customer orders what we need to produce. We have finished goods replenishment. So again, we have replenishment for the finished goods that often dictates, how many more quantities that we need. And then we have material requirements plan. Okay, guys, we have reached the end of our slide. So this is the last slide, and we're going to be talking about physical supply and distribution. So all the activities involved in this is in moving the goods, right? So it's from the supplier and to the beginning of the production process to the end of the production process, which, like I've told you earlier, it ends with the customer. The customer is the end user. They are the end point. So that's what this has to do with. And in transportation is in between every single one of those processes, so that's a big part of this. Distribution inventory, that's another part. Warehousing, we definitely have that as a huge part of physical supply and distribution. Packaging and material handling. So that is basically a summary of what is all included in your physical supply and distribution.